Hi, I'm Clara, and today's story will take you on a journey of betrayal and sweet revenge. I want you to picture a quiet Sunday evening, the kind where the house smells like roasted garlic and the TV is only background noise. My father had remarried 2 years earlier. His new wife, my stepmother, Evelyn, was polished, practiced, and always 3 steps ahead in social maneuvering. She wore confidence like a tailored coat and used it to press people into shapes that suited her. I was 24, freshly graduated, still figuring out how to be an adult in a house that used to be mine. My room was the same, but the energy wasn't. There were new framed photos on the mantel, Evelyn in a dozen flattering angles, my father smiling like a man who'd found a second spring. I tried to be kind. I tried to be patient. But kindness and patience don't armor you against deliberate cruelty. The first time she embarrassed me publicly, it was small, an offhand comment at a family brunch about my lack of ambition. She said it like a joke, but the laugh that followed was sharp and precise. My cheeks burned. I felt the familiar hollow of being underestimated. I smiled and let it pass. That should have been the end of it. But Evelyn didn't stop at jokes. She escalated. A month later, she invited my extended family for a celebratory dinner, a thinly veiled showcase of her hosting skills. The dining room was immaculate, candles, linen, the kind of place settings that make you feel like you're in a magazine. I arrived early to help because I still wanted to belong. She accepted my help with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. While I arranged silverware, she whispered to my cousin, loud enough for me to hear, "Isn't it cute how Clara still thinks she's part of this family?" I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands trembled. I wanted to say something. Anything, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I kept working, my fingers clumsy, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. The dinner began. Glasses clinked. Conversation flowed. Then, halfway through the main course, Evelyn stood up with a glass in her hand and announced, "Before dessert, I think we should clear something up about Clara." Silence tightened like a noose. I looked at my father. He was smiling, confused. Evelyn continued, voice syrupy. "You all know how she's always been a bit dramatic about money, right? Well, I found out she's been asking Dad for loans, little things, because she can't manage her finances. I thought you should know." Laughter bubbled from the table. My face went hot. My stomach dropped. I felt every eye like a spotlight. She had rehearsed the line. She had timed the pause for maximum effect. The humiliation was surgical. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My hands clenched under the table. I wanted to stand up and scream, to tell them the truth, that I'd been paying my own rent, that the loans were a misunderstanding, that I had been saving for a small business idea, but the words were swallowed by the room's laughter. After dinner, I retreated to the kitchen. The tile was cold under my feet. I pressed my palms to the counter and let the silence press back. My chest ached. I replayed the scene in my head, each detail a fresh sting. I could still hear Evelyn's voice, the way she'd said drama like it was a diagnosis. I felt small, ridiculous, exposed. That night, I lay awake and cataloged every slight, every condescending smile, every helpful correction she'd offered since moving in. The list grew long. The humiliation wasn't just one moment, it was a pattern. She had built a narrative about me and then performed it for an audience. The injustice tasted metallic in my mouth. But beneath the shame, something else flickered, a slow, steady heat. It wasn't the hot, blind anger that makes you lash out. It was a colder, clearer thing, an awareness that I had been given a choice. I could let this define me, or I could do something about it. The idea of doing nothing felt worse than any embarrassment. I pictured Evelyn's smile, the way she basked in other people's discomfort. I imagined the satisfaction of watching that smile falter. I started small. I stopped volunteering to be the butt of her jokes. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided my story. I began to keep receipts, to save emails, to document the little manipulations that had been easy to dismiss. Each piece of evidence was a small talisman against the helplessness I'd felt at the table. The more I collected, the more I noticed how Evelyn controlled the narrative. She curated conversations, steered topics, and always had a quip ready to redirect sympathy away from me. She used my father's affection like a shield. If anyone questioned her, she'd bat her eyelashes and say, "Oh, you know how protective he is." People forgave her because she made them comfortable. That was her power. She made cruelty look like charm. I began to rehearse responses in my head. Not angry outbursts. Those would play into her hands, but precise, quiet counters that would reveal the truth without seeming petty. I wanted to expose the pattern, not just the moment. I wanted to make the room feel the same cold that had settled in my chest that night. At the same time, I had to be careful. Revenge isn't a spontaneous flame. It's a slow burn that needs oxygen and timing. I couldn't risk making my father the collateral damage. He loved her. He saw her as the woman who made him laugh again. I loved him too, and I didn't want to be the person who tore his happiness apart. So my plan had to be surgical, not destructive. It had to be undeniable. That's where the real work began, turning humiliation into evidence, anger into strategy, and a private hurt into a public truth. I would not let Evelyn's performance stand. I would not let her make me the punchline. The next time she tried to embarrass me, the room would pause, but this time, it would be because the story she'd told about me would collapse in front of everyone. After that dinner, Evelyn's behavior didn't soften. If anything, it sharpened. She seemed to enjoy the control. At family gatherings, she'd make helpful comments about my career choices, my clothes, my friends. She'd ask my father, within earshot, whether I was serious about my plans. Each barb was a test. Would I flinch? Would I defend myself? Would I give her the drama she craved? I learned to keep my face neutral, to let the words slide off like water. But inside, the pressure built. I felt like a kettle on a low flame, quiet, but steadily heating. The more I held back, the more precise my thinking became. I started to map Evelyn's moves. She had patterns, public jabs, private undermining, and a talent for making others complicit. If I wanted to stop her, I had to break that pattern. I began by strengthening my own position. I took on freelance work that paid better than my old part-time job. I started a small online shop selling handmade items, something I dreamed about but never had the courage to try. The work was slow at first, but it gave me a sense of control. I kept the shop quiet, a private project that fed my confidence. Every sale felt like a small victory. At the same time, I gathered proof. I saved messages where Evelyn had lied, screenshots of conversations where she'd misrepresented me, and receipts that contradicted her claims. I recorded, discreetly, a few conversations where she tried to manipulate my father into thinking I was irresponsible. I know recording is a heavy step, but I did it because words had been used as weapons against me. I wanted to hold those words up and show them for what they were. There were nights I almost gave up. Revenge can feel petty when you're the only one who cares. There were moments when I missed the easy warmth of pretending everything was fine. But every time I thought about backing down, I remembered the dinner table, the way laughter had cut me open. I remembered the cold tile of the kitchen and the way my hands had trembled. That memory became fuel. I also started to test Evelyn in small, controlled ways. I corrected a false statement she made in front of a cousin, calmly and with evidence. I asked my father a direct question about a loan she'd mentioned, and when he looked puzzled, I let the silence do the work. Each small correction didn't humiliate her outright, but it chipped away at the narrative she'd built. People began to notice the inconsistencies. Evelyn noticed too. Her smiles grew tighter. She began to watch me with a new intensity, like a chess player who suddenly realizes their opponent is thinking 3 moves ahead. That was when she escalated again, this time more personal. She started to leave passive-aggressive notes in shared spaces, to forget, to tell me about family events, and to make snide remarks about my sensitivity.
She wanted me to react.
She wanted me to be the spectacle. I didn't give her the spectacle. Instead, I accelerated my plan. I had 2 goals: expose her pattern to the people who mattered, and do it in a way that didn't make me look like I was attacking my father's happiness. I needed a setting where the truth would be undeniable and where Evelyn's performance would be impossible to maintain. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My father's birthday was approaching, a big family dinner at a restaurant he loved. Evelyn was planning the guest list and the toasts. She wanted it to be her moment, a demonstration of how seamlessly she'd integrated into the family. She sent out invitations with a flourish and asked me to help with the seating chart. I accepted, knowing this was the perfect stage. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I worked quietly. I compiled the evidence into a timeline, messages, receipts, recorded clips, and a few corroborating notes from relatives who'd witnessed her manipulations but had been too polite to speak up. I didn't want to ambush anyone. I wanted to present facts. Facts are hard to argue with. I also prepared my own demeanor. I practiced speaking slowly, clearly, and without accusation. I rehearsed how I would present the timeline, not as a dramatic reveal, but as a simple, logical sequence that showed a pattern. I wanted the room to see the through line: small manipulations, public humiliations, and deliberate misrepresentations. I wanted them to feel the same cold clarity I'd felt the night she announced my loans. On the day of the dinner, my hands were steady. My heart thudded, but it was a purposeful rhythm. I arrived early and slipped the timeline into a folder. I had a backup plan. If anyone tried to dismiss me, I would hand the folder to my father privately and ask him to read it before the toasts. I didn't want to humiliate Evelyn in a way that would destroy my father's trust. I wanted him to see the truth and decide for himself. The restaurant was warm, full of chatter and the clink of cutlery. Evelyn glowed in a dress that caught the light. She moved through the room like a queen. My father was relaxed, laughing with old friends. The moment felt fragile and perfect. When the time for toasts came, Evelyn stood and raised her glass. She launched into a speech about family and gratitude, and then, predictably, she pivoted to a story about me. "Clara has always been so dramatic," she said, smiling at the table. A few polite chuckles followed. I felt the old heat rise, but I kept my face calm. Then I did something she didn't expect. I asked to speak. My voice was quiet at first, but it carried. "Dad, before we continue, can I show you something?" I handed him the folder. He looked surprised but opened it. I watched his face as he read. The messages, the receipts, the timeline. The room hummed with curiosity. Evelyn's smile faltered. She tried to interject, but my father held up a hand. He read, slowly, and then looked up. The air shifted. People leaned forward. The pattern was there on the page, small manipulations, repeated over time. The evidence didn't scream. It simply existed. That was its power. Evelyn's eyes flashed. She reached for the folder, but my father closed it gently. "Is this true?" he asked, voice low. The question hung in the air like a verdict. Evelyn's practiced composure cracked. For the first time, she didn't have a ready quip. She stammered, then tried to laugh it off. But the laughter felt brittle. The room paused. That pause was everything I'd been working toward. It was the moment when the narrative she'd built began to unravel. People who had laughed at my expense were now watching her try to explain herself. The power had shifted, and I felt a strange, overwhelming relief. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had simply shown the truth. The pause stretched, and in that silence, I could hear the small details I'd memorized: the scrape of a chair, the soft intake of breath from my cousin, the distant clatter of dishes. My father's face was unreadable. Evelyn's mouth moved, but the words were thin. She attempted to charm her way out. "Oh, it's all a misunderstanding," but the folder had already done its work. Facts have a way of making charm look like costume. Someone at the table, my aunt, who had always been quietly observant, cleared her throat. "Evelyn," she said, not unkindly, "we all want what's best for Dad. But this is different." Her voice was steady. Others nodded. The room's energy shifted from curiosity to judgment. Evelyn's eyes darted around, searching for allies. For the first time, she found fewer than she expected. My father looked at me, and in that look I saw 1,000 small things: confusion, hurt, and a dawning realization. He had trusted her. He had let her shape the family's narrative. Now he was forced to reconcile the woman he loved with the pattern of behavior laid out in front of him. It was a painful, human moment. Evelyn tried to regain control. She reached for the folder, for the narrative, for any script that would let her be the victim. "You're making this into something it's not," she said, voice rising. But the room had already decided to listen to the evidence. People began to speak, quietly at first, then with more conviction. A cousin mentioned a similar incident. An old family friend recalled a different manipulation. The timeline I'd prepared became a mirror, reflecting a pattern others had noticed, but hadn't named. Then Evelyn did something I hadn't expected. She lashed out. "You're trying to ruin me," she hissed, eyes blazing. "You're trying to make me look bad in front of your father." Her voice had the edge of someone who'd been cornered. The anger was loud, but it was also revealing. When people are forced to defend themselves, they often show their true colors. My father stood up slowly. He looked at Evelyn, then at me. "I need some air," he said, voice shaking. He left the table. The room was stunned into silence. I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. I hadn't wanted to hurt him. I had wanted truth. But truth sometimes comes with collateral pain. Outside, my father paced on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. He was older than I'd ever seen him in that moment, vulnerable, human. I joined him. We didn't speak at first. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Finally, he turned to me. "Clara," he said, voice raw. "I didn't know." There was no accusation in it, only bewilderment. I told him everything, calmly, the way I'd rehearsed. I showed him the messages on my phone, the receipts, the recordings. He listened, and with each piece of evidence, his face changed. There was hurt, yes, but there was also a dawning clarity. When he finished, he took my hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have seen it sooner." That apology was small, but it was real. It mattered more than any public vindication. It was the human repair I'd hoped for. We went back inside together. The room was quieter now, the earlier laughter gone. Evelyn sat alone, her composure shattered. She tried to smile at my father, but it was a small, brittle thing. What followed wasn't a dramatic courtroom scene. There were no raised voices, no public shaming. Instead, there were consequences that fit the pattern. My father, after reading the timeline and speaking with a few relatives, decided to set boundaries. He told Evelyn that certain behaviors were unacceptable and that he wouldn't allow manipulation in his home. He asked her to apologize to the family for the public humiliation. She did, but the apology was thin, an attempt to patch a fabric she'd torn. The real payoff, though, was quieter and more satisfying. People who had once laughed at my expense began to treat me differently. They apologized in small ways, private messages, a hand on the shoulder, a look that said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it." Evelyn's aura of untouchable charm had been punctured. She was still present, but the room no longer deferred to her. Her jokes landed flat. Her attempts to steer conversations were met with polite resistance. The power she'd wielded so effortlessly had been redistributed. I felt a release that was physical. It was like unclenching a fist I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Tears came, unexpected, hot and cleansing. I let them fall. I had wanted justice, but what I received was more complex. Validation, repair, and a new sense of agency. I had taken my humiliation and turned it into a tool for truth. In the weeks that followed, things settled into a new normal. My father and I rebuilt trust slowly. Evelyn stayed in the house for a while, but the dynamic had changed. She was kinder in some moments, defensive in others. People were wary of giving her the stage she once had. I continued to grow my small business, and with each success, the old taunts lost their sting. Looking back, the revenge wasn't about spectacle. It wasn't about making someone suffer for the sake of suffering. It was about reclaiming dignity. It was about showing that being underestimated doesn't mean you're powerless. The most satisfying part wasn't Evelyn's discomfort. It was the way truth rebalanced the room. Justice, in this case, felt like a quiet correction rather than a dramatic collapse. If there's a lesson here, It's this: humiliation can be weaponized, but it can also be dismantled. Keep your evidence. Keep your dignity. Choose your moments. And remember that the most effective revenge is often the one that restores you, not just punishes the other person. In the end, I didn't need to shout to be heard. I showed the truth, and the room finally paused. Justice didn't look like a spectacle. It looked like quiet, undeniable clarity. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And, of course, subscribe for more stories like this. I'm Clara. See you next time.